키위의 나라 뉴질랜드. 한국인들에게는 작년에 자유무역 협정을 맺을 만큼 아주 친숙한 나라이기도 합니다. 그러나 한국인들이 잘 모르는 사실은 벌써 19세기에 뉴질랜드 여성들은 세계 최초로 참정권을 얻었고 거의 20년 전에 벌써 최초의 여성 수상을 선출했습니다. 그만큼 여성의 사회 지위가 높은 나라 뉴질랜드. 오늘 주한 뉴질랜드 대사님 클레어 펀리를 만나보겠습니다. What do you think is the greatest outcome of an FTA between Korea and New Zealand?
It's a very unusual FTA for us. I mean, we've tended to be forging new ground in FTAs and opening up new market access that no one has had before, two-way. This time round, in fact, it's really a catch-up FTA. The market access has already been opened right back in the very early days with Chile, more than 10 years ago. And of course, since then, there have been other very high-profile FTAs with everyone from China most recently through the European Union and back to Chorus. So there are aspects of the Korean market that a number of other foreign competitors have been able to compete within, but we have been unable to. Now that there's an FTA between our two countries, this is from the New Zealand point of view, it's now possible to enter on the same footing as other foreign investors and traders and business people. I think two-way, Korea negotiated very much focused on its own national interests, of course, as all FTA negotiators do, and has been very tough in the negotiations. So the most sensitive areas of trade, which tend to be in the agricultural sector for us, have been actually excluded from the FTA. So there's been a number of areas that Korea has preserved, and other areas where there have been quantitative limits applied. So I think Korea has done a very good job of protecting its own perceived interests. There's a lot of space in the middle where we meet and cooperate together. There are whole chapters of the FTA around agricultural cooperation, around forestry and fisheries cooperation, around people-to-people exchanges. So there are things like expanding our working holiday scheme to 3,000, and that's a very popular scheme. It tends to fill up on the first day that it opens. It's very popular, and it's popular two ways. It works very well for New Zealand and for Korea, but a lot of young Koreans are keen to come and work and study and holiday under the scheme in New Zealand, and we're happy to welcome them. There's a little fewer heading back to Korea, but from New Zealand to Korea, but we're encouraging young New Zealanders to come and experience Korea.
Room to grow.
That's right, there's room to grow there. And there's also areas of cooperation in agriculture, like scholarships offered by New Zealand for young people from rural areas, for people active in agriculture, horticulture, fisheries, forestry, to come and study in New Zealand at the expense of the New Zealand government, to experience our way of agriculture, and not just of production but also of international promotion and marketing. New Zealand has a very unusual profile for a developed country in terms of its foreign exchange earnings. We have very large proportion of our foreign exchange earnings coming from the primary sector, in particular agriculture, forestry, fisheries, which isn't typical for OECD members, but it has created a prosperous and thriving economy and society in New Zealand through our own particular approach, and we're happy to share that. Tourism is also very important for us, so I think if you're looking at the two big parts of our economy in terms of foreign exchange earning, primary sector and tourism would be the two.
And most come back with very, very positive feelings towards New Zealand?
We believe so. We rely on our broader regulatory environment for casual labour, our educational regulatory environment to ensure that the experience of everyone in New Zealand, whether they're visitors under the Working Holiday Scheme or young New Zealanders working in those sectors, receive appropriate lawful treatment by their employers or the education providers. And we monitor the social media and the conversations that are going on around the experience of young people in New Zealand. And yes, I don't want to draw comparisons with other countries because I think that's never a good idea to do. But by and large, the reports from New Zealand are overwhelmingly positive.
That's very understandable, actually. But young Koreans have fairly limited opportunities to go abroad and really experience life before they actually take it on, full time. So it's a very unique opportunity.
That's right, and I think it's been part of New Zealand culture to have what young people call the big OE, the big overseas experience, and it's built into our young people. A very large proportion travel immediately after university, and in some cases they'll have a gap year between high school and university. So they're very young people, or at least I think of them as very young.
Yes.
If we're thinking about 18-year-olds,
yeah,
exactly. But there's that desire to function independently, to make their own decisions. Let's hope they're making good decisions.
Well,
Yeah.
This will help.
That's right.
Help.
That's right.
They're young. They won't always make good decisions, but at least. But it's the things that as I was looking through, and I said the new things that I learned is that even though we seem to have known a lot about New Zealand, it seems like we are very close. I didn't know that women in New Zealand had made such progress. Have been so aggressively active in gaining women's rights.
Yeah, that's true. We celebrate each year in September the day that women were given the right to vote, and that was the first country. Well, at that stage we were a dominion of the British Crown, but we were the first independent state entity to give women the vote in 1893. That's right, very early, and we've had women MPs come into the House as well. Women actually were only allowed to run as MPs in 1919, and it took a few years for women to come into the House after that. They now occupy a high 30%, like 39% of Parliament, of the people holding parliamentary seats are women, and 7 out of 20 of our cabinet, or put another way, 10 out of 25 of our ministers are women. Clearly we can do better because we're still not quite at that complete parity, but in terms of global rankings, that's not too bad. Another area where New Zealand does particularly well is in the parity of employment remuneration. We rank right toward the top.
Income gap is actually the
smallest in the world, that's right. Still too high, it's sitting just over 10%, I think, around.
But it's still amazing.
It's a lot better than any other country, well, many other countries, and certainly it is sitting at the top. So for women in New Zealand, there remain issues, clearly, issues around, for example, women on the boards of large corporates. We're still not in the range of proportional representation for women that we'd expect. It's still below, it's between 25-30%, and it should be higher. And it hasn't grown as quickly as we would have wanted. I think issues around violence are very important within the family and in society, and particularly women as victims of violence. Those are areas that our government has identified for particular focus. Even so, for our economy to remain strong and growing, we've got to keep women in the workforce, and we don't want to be losing well-educated, capable women from the economically productive parts of the economy. And currently the employment participation rate for women still sits below men. It sits at about 65% and men at about 75%. So there's 10%, that we'd love to see, being made actively involved in the economy.
How do you tackle that? I mean, which area of the employment in the business sector does New Zealand focus on in order to get women up to par?
Exactly. So it's not an education issue. Some of the policies that have been adopted have been around, for example, making it easier for women to move in and out of the workforce at various times in their lives. At certain stages they may want to take time out and to ease their coming back in. Also around paid parental leave, so that both parents can choose to take time out and not only be paid during that period, but have a guaranteed job to come back to afterwards over a certain time frame. I mean, that's all very important stuff.
Yes.
And there's also been some, one of the strong areas for our ministry for women is around the analysis and research that they commission, and looking at the area of violence in women. There was a very interesting report that's just come out in the last few months around the interplay between women's education, their employment, and whether or not they're likely to experience violence. So although we all know that, for example, family and violence happens in all social strata, there is a connection between how educated women are and whether they're in paid employment as to whether they're likely to experience societal violence. That's not to say that anyone can fall a victim, but there is a sort of proportionate connection.
You don't want to generalize too much, but if my general would be that the higher the education, and if the woman is employed, then there's a less chance of her experiencing violence. Exactly,
and the stats show it in New Zealand. It was just some interesting work that our Ministry for Women has done, and that's sort of indicative of the type of work that they're doing. So a lot of what the ministry does is around making sure that there's good information and a good understanding to assist in policy making. Much of the policy making is actually mainstreamed across other ministries, because often good policy for women is also good policy for, I don't want to make women sound unfortunate, but it's good policy for example, the disabled, or for different ethnic groups. If people are being encouraged and helped to make the most of themselves, and given those opportunities, that means everyone gets those opportunities, whether they're women or disabled or from different ethnic groups, It
is. I mean, it's not just the gender. It is actually inclusive of everybody.
That's right.
That needs help.
And wouldn't it be great if, our next generation didn't really have to focus on gender differences or women's issues or...
Talk about you.
Oh, yes.
All right. Tell me about how you got to where you are now.
I've been, I joined the Foreign Ministry in 1989, so it's, quite a long time. Not quite 30 years yet, but, not that far away. Yeah, that's right. I'm a lawyer and historian by academic training. I studied in New Zealand and in Beijing, at Beijing University.
So Northeast Asia has always been an
sort of. Yes, it has. And so if I was going to describe myself, I'd say I'm a sinologist, regional political security, trade policy, lawyer, multilateral. I've done quite a lot. In more recent years, the focus has been Asia-Pacific regional work. My first posting was actually 4 years in Geneva working on UN matters, a mix of human rights, disarmament, environment. Then back to New Zealand. I started as a lawyer in the ministry for 2 years, then to Geneva, then a very short stint back in New Zealand before I went out as Consul General to Shanghai, then back in as a Deputy Head of Trade Negotiations, then out to Taiwan to head what we call the New Zealand Representative Office there, New Zealand Commerce and Industry Office, then back into New Zealand heading our trade law work, then heading our legal branch briefly before I moved across to head our Asia Pacific regional work, which is ASEAN with the Southeast Asian countries, APEC, East Asia Summit, that sort of work, and then on to head our North Asia work, and then here. So there's been a strong North Asia element thread throughout. I'm a Mandarin speaker. I speak some Shanghainese, some Minanhua, and Taiwanese.
I was just going to ask, I mean, you've been here only a year, so it's not been that long, but you've seen your share of Korean women and women, how they live their lives here, young and older. What do you think?
I enjoy working in Korea for a number of reasons, and one is the very direct nature. I know we're in North Asia, and yes, indirectness is part of the toolkit, but having lived in different parts of North Asia, I'd have to say I really enjoy the directness of Koreans, particularly the directness of Korean women with other women. I find scope to engage in a very direct and honest way that I really value. And I've met such a range of fantastic women leaders. I know things are still not easy, and you just look at the statistics and you can see that in terms of women's labour participation rates, remuneration rates that we were talking about before. This isn't easy, but I meet so many fantastic, positive and constructive women who are doing great things. Yeah,
I've heard that individually they find Korean women to be very capable and probably more capable than a lot of other women in other countries, but it's hard to get the mind around why the institution has not been able to support the rise and function of these kind of women.
Yeah, and I do notice in a typical environment where there are both men and women present, depending on the way the hierarchy works, often women are very quiet and say much less than they say in a different environment where they feel more comfortable and relaxed and are less worried about the sort of gender dynamic. That's hopefully something that will evolve over time, but it is an indicator that women still don't feel free completely to not have to take constant account of what the gender dynamic is in a room.
Sure.
Yeah.
Last question, because we ask this for everybody. Because you represent New Zealand in Korea, we consider you have a global leadership role. So we're going to give you we're going to say that you will be Ms. President of the world for a day. And I'm your genie. So I get to give you one wish. So I say, well, I'll let you can change one thing. Whatever you want in the world, you're president of the world, leader of the world, you can change one thing. What would you change?
This isn't really a direct answer to that question, I guess, but health and education is so basic, and they're the basic tools that equip children for life and are the great equalisers. So, my one thing is two huge things that I'd change. It's the basis of access and enjoyment of health and educational opportunities for women, but really for everyone, because if a society is getting its health and education right, so many other things take care of themselves. I think regardless of what political hue anyone is, most people would agree that there's a strong public good aspect in both health and education, and that those are two areas where the state should be intervening in a meaningful way. That's certainly been New Zealand's tradition. We introduced free education and free healthcare very early, and I look at other countries that have done the same. I was reading recently about Uruguay, who did something similar in the 60s and 70s, and the impacts on countries are huge. So those are two huge things rather than one specific thing. That's where I'd focus.
Yeah. We give you a little bit of leeway.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My
for
pleasure.
giving us such